hear a story? How about a story about a giant? I have one. It's by Oscar Wilde. It's called The Selfish Giant. Every afternoon as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees in the springtime that broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl. And in the autumn, they bore rich fruit, and the birds sat on the trees. And they sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here," they cried to each other. One day the giant came back, and when he had been to his friend to visit in the Cornish ogre, and they stayed with him for 7 years, and the 7 years were over, he said all that he had to say. His conversation was pretty limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. And when he arrived, he saw children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that. I'll allow no one to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall around it, and he put a notice up on the board: "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children now had nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones. They didn't like it. They used to wander around on the high walls and when their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "Oh, how happy we were there," they said one to another. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only the garden of the selfish giant was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it. There were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, and when it saw the notice on the board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all year round." The snow covered the grass with a great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden, and he blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail for a visit." So the hail came, and every day for 3 hours it rattled on the roof of the castle till it broke most of the slates. And then he ran around the house and the garden as fast as he could, and he was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant, as he sat in the window and looked out at his cold, white garden. "I hope there'll be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," he said. "So as it is always winter there, and the north wind, and the hail, and the frost, and the snow dance about through the trees." One morning the giant was lying awake in his bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window. But it was so long since he heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. "I believe the spring has come at last," said the giant. And he jumped out of his bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in. They were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that could see there was a little child, and the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's head. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up to the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene. Only in the corner, it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach the branches of the tree. He was wandering all around, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could, but the boy was too tiny. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I've been," he said. "Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever." He was very, very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly, and he went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were frightened, and they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant snuck up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up in the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang in it, and the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, they came running back, and with them came the spring. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant. And so he took a great axe, and he knocked down the wall. And then when the people were going to the market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. "But where is your little companion?" he said. "The boy I put in the tree." The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. "We don't know," answered the children. "He's gone away." "You must tell him to be sure to come back tomorrow," said the giant. But all the children said they didn't know where he lived, and they had never seen him before. And the giant felt sad. Every afternoon when school was over, the children came and played with the giant. But the little boy who the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his first little friend and often spoke of him. "How I would like to see him," he used to say. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play anymore, so he sat in a huge armchair, and he watched the children at their games and admired his garden. "I have many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." One winter morning, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He didn't hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the springtime asleep, and that the flowers were just resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked, and certainly it was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden, in a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms, its branches were gold and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy that he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came to the child, and when he came quite close, his face grew red with anger. He said, "Who has dared to wound you?" For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on his little feet. "Who has dared to wound you?" cried the giant. "Tell me, and I'll take my big sword and I'll slay him." "Nay," answered the child, but these are the wounds of love. Who are you? Said the giant. And a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled at the giant and said to him, You let me play once in your garden. Today you will come with me to my garden, which is in paradise. And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found that the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms. They think he went home with the little child with the nail prints in his hands and his feet. I wonder who Oscar Wilde thought that child might have been. Well, that's our story. I hope you enjoyed it. You come back next time and we'll have another. Make sure you be good.